Hey there. Tonight we're setting aside the noise of the present just for a little while and stepping into the soft gray hush of a world that rarely gave women a voice. This isn't a story about kings and wars, not really. It's about silence, about candlelit corners, about the weight of expectations that no one spoke aloud but every girl in Tudor England knew too well. It's about what happened when your future wasn't yours to shape, and when even something as intimate as your own body became a matter of duty, not desire. If quiet stories like this help you unwind where history unfolds in whispers and empathy matters more than judgment, you're always welcome to subscribe or follow along, but only if it feels right for you. No pressure, just a gentle invitation. Now take a breath, let your eyes soften, and let's begin. You're 7 years old, maybe 8, though no one's really marking the days like that. The room is cold, even in spring, and you're kneeling on the rush-covered floor arranging wooden dolls in a crooked circle. They don't have faces anymore. Years of siblings' hands have worn them smooth, but they're still your favorites. One has a ribbon dyed with beet juice wrapped around what's left of its waist. That one's the bride. That's you. Though you don't know it yet, the game you're playing isn't make-believe. It's foreshadowing. Because your marriage, it's already been arranged. Quietly, strategically, perhaps even written into a ledger next to a note about sheepland or a promised dowry. Your family is modest, but not poor enough to have something to trade. And you, small and sweet and silent, are part of that exchange. You don't even know the boy's name yet. You might not meet him for years, but it's done. In Tudor England, the idea of marrying for love was, well, a luxury reserved for poetry. Real-life marriages were made for land alliances and reputation, especially for girls like you. No one asked if you were ready. Readiness wasn't the point. You were born with one clear path ahead to become a wife, preferably young, and preferably fertile. This wasn't unusual. In fact, it was expected. Among both noble and common families, girls were often promised by the age of 7 or 8, the official age for legal marriage. Technically 12 for girls, but the arrangements began much earlier. A betrothal might be celebrated with a miniature gift. A thimble, a doll's ring, a length of fine linen meant for a future veil. Not so much a present, but a reminder. And while you might still dream of picnics or playing in the orchard, your mother has already begun to remind you, gently, carefully, not to laugh too loudly, not to speak too freely, not to stay in the sun too long. You'll ruin your skin, she says. Pale is prized, reserved is better. Your future depends on how well you behave. Your days are stitched together with chores, needlework, and whispered lessons. Not lessons in reading, of course, unless you're from a wealthier home. Many Tudor girls weren't taught their letters. What they were taught was far more important: how to serve, how to obey, how to endure, and how to disappear just enough to be acceptable. And then there's the walking. You're shown how to take shorter steps, not because your feet are small, but because movement itself must be restrained. The idea is not to appear too eager, too bold, too confident. These things might be charming in a boy. In a girl, they could be dangerous. But there's another kind of danger too, one you don't yet understand. It lies in how your body is beginning to be seen, not by you, but by others, by neighbors, by suitors' mothers, by the local midwife who watches you out of the corner of her eye and murmurs that you're growing quickly. There's no celebration in this, no talk of dreams, only quiet calculations, because soon, very soon, you'll be expected to serve a different role, one far heavier than a child's game. Historians still debate just how much agency girls had in their own marriages during the Tudor period. Some believe that in smaller communities, especially among lower-class families, girls occasionally had some say, if only indirectly. But most records suggest otherwise. In many cases, girls were handed over like parcels, signed, sealed, and delivered before their voices were ever fully formed. And what of the boys? Were they equally bound? Yes and no. A boy might also have his marriage arranged, but he had time, freedom, often choices. A girl, she had a deadline, one written into her bones before she ever bled. There's a certain irony in how Tudor society viewed womanhood. On one hand, girls were considered fragile, emotional, in need of guidance. On the other, they were expected to shoulder the full weight of family honor, lineage, and reproduction. You weren't seen as fully rational, but you were somehow responsible for everything that followed. A contradiction softly pressed into every part of your life. Your own opinion it isn't asked for, not because anyone's cruel, but because it never occurred to them that you'd have one. You're quiet. That's good. You're modest. Even better, you listen. Perfect. These are not virtues, they're prerequisites. Without them, you are unfit. And perhaps you hear stories from the older girls, those who've already married. You hear them whisper at the well or murmur behind veils at market. Some seem content, even happy. Others speak in half sentences, glance away when you ask too many questions. They know what's coming. They just won't say it. A curious tidbit from the period: some girls, particularly among the gentry, were given small silver coins to wear in their shoes during the betrothal ceremony. Not for luck exactly, but to remind them to step carefully into their new lives. A superstition, perhaps, but telling nonetheless. And so you keep stepping, quietly, obediently, toward a future you didn't choose. And while your hands learn to mend stockings and grind herbs for stew, your heart, whatever dreams it holds, learns to stay silent. At night you stare at the ceiling beams and wonder what your husband will look like. Will he be kind? Will he be old? Will he smell of horses or ink or onions? You don't know. You won't know. Not until it's too late to say no. Because here's the truth in Tudor England. Your story begins before you have a say in it. And for many girls, that beginning isn't a page. They're lucky if it's even a footnote. But you right now are still a child. And somewhere in the distance, a robin sings. The world hasn't yet claimed you. Not fully. There's time for one more moment of stillness. One more game with your faceless dolls. One more dream before reality arrives with its quiet knock. You're older now. Not quite a woman by your own reckoning, but old enough that no one calls you child anymore. Your hands are rough from work, kneading bread, scrubbing pots, stitching seams by candlelight. But your skin has remained pale just as your mother hoped. The freckles that once dotted your nose have faded, or at least been scrubbed into submission, with lemon peel and vinegar. You don't smile much these days. Smiling can be misread. The house smells different this morning, beeswax and lavender. The faint trace of roasted meat that means guests are coming. You know before anyone says it that today isn't ordinary. There's a stiffness in the way your mother dresses you, lacing your bodice tighter than usual, smoothing your hair until your scalp stings. Someone important is visiting. You're betrothed now, not just in theory, not in some vague, tucked-away conversation overheard through a cracked door. Officially, formally. The contract was sealed last week, signed with a shaky hand and a family mark. You saw it yourself, your name beside his inked like livestock. And today is the day he comes to see what he's bought. You meet him in the great hall. He doesn't bow. He nods polite, but distracted. He's older than you expected. Not old, but seasoned. He looks like he's already buried a wife. Maybe he has. Maybe that's why he needs you. You barely speak. Your mother does all the talking. You just sit hands folded in your lap, careful not to cross your ankles or lift your eyes for too long. Later that night, someone murmurs that the wedding is set. 2 weeks. Short notice, but not unusual. You're of age after all. At least according to the law. 12, they said, was old enough. And you are, 14, 15. It blurs together. Time stopped meaning anything once the decision was made. The night before the ceremony, you can't sleep. The room feels too small, the sheets too stiff. You stare at the ceiling again, just like when you were a child. But now, instead of wondering who he is, you wonder what will happen. Not in the storybook sense. In the real sense. What does a wedding night mean exactly? No one tells you. Not properly. Your mother brushes your hair and says something vague about duty and obedience. The older maid downstairs gives you a look that lingers too long. That's all. And then it's your wedding day. You walk down the church aisle in borrowed shoes and a wool gown cinched so tight you can barely breathe. Your hands tremble in your gloves, and your veil itches like straw. But you keep walking, because that's what good girls do. Later after the feast, the music, the forced laughter, you're taken to the bridal chamber. It's quiet now, too quiet. The fire hisses low and tired. Your new husband lifts the veil without ceremony. You try to smile. He doesn't. He just nods and begins unbuttoning his doublet. There's no affection, no soft words, no warmth, just expectation. You're supposed to know what to do, or at least pretend. So you lie still. You close your eyes. And you hope it ends quickly. Because here's the truth. The wedding night isn't yours. Not in Tudor England. It belongs to your husband, to your families, to the reputation that hangs on what happens or doesn't happen in this bed. In many noble or landowning households, consummation wasn't just assumed. It was expected to be proven. If the sheets showed blood, there would be whispers of success. If not, there could be trouble, allegations, gossip, even annulment. Your body becomes evidence, not of love, but of eligibility. And this isn't a quiet tradition. Sometimes, particularly in upper-class homes, the wedding night was a public affair, at least symbolically. The couple was escorted to bed by family members blessed and left to fulfill their duty. In France, this ritual included onlookers, who stayed just beyond the curtain waiting for proof. In England, it was subtler, but the pressure remained. One recorded Tudor custom even involved guests visiting the bridal chamber the next morning to inspect the bed linen. Clean sheets meant failure. Stains meant success. Either way, you weren't alone, not really. Privacy was a myth. Historians still debate how often these practices were enforced. Some believed they were reserved for noble marriages, where alliances hinged on fertility and reputation. Others argue that even common households placed enormous weight on the first night. Either way, the expectation was heavy. It always hung in the room. Your thoughts are racing. You don't know what to think, let alone what to feel. There's no candle lit, not because of modesty, but because wax is expensive. The room is dim fire casting long shadows. You see only a blur of movement and feel the weight of expectation. You do not move. You do not speak. You simply let it happen. It is not about intimacy. Not here. Not now. It is about duty, tradition, confirmation. You are a wife now, and this is what wives do. There's a myth in your village whispered among the girls who aren't supposed to talk about such things. That if you cry on your wedding night, you'll curse your womb. It's nonsense, of course. But you hold your tears anyway, just in case. Tidbit. In some households, the bed itself was blessed by clergy before the ceremony. Not for romance, but for function. The hope wasn't for pleasure, it was for a child. You wonder if your mother felt the same way once. If she lay awake like you are now counting heartbeats and staring into the dark. If she waited for it to be over. If it ever was. There's a shift in the mattress, a creak of old wood. Then silence. It's done. You're not sure what just happened, but you know it's important. You pull the blanket around your shoulders and stare at the fire until the last ember dims. Tomorrow they'll ask if it went well. They won't use those words, of course, but they'll look. They'll know. And whatever you say or don't will become part of your story passed from mouth to mouth. Like a recipe no one enjoys, but everyone follows. You're not a girl anymore. You're a wife. You're a vessel. And from now on, your body isn't just yours. It's shared with your husband, your household, your lineage. And no one asked if that was okay. The mornings are different now. Your bed feels colder, though there's someone beside you. You wake early not because of chores, but because your sleep never quite settles. You stir when he turns, when he breathes too loudly, when the wind rustles the shutters. Your body is alert in ways it never was before, like a room always half lit, never quite dark enough to rest, never bright enough to see clearly. You're still expected to rise before the sun to stoke the fire and set the water to boil. Breakfast must be ready. Floors must be swept. Linen must be aired. And by nightfall, when the hearth glows again and your back aches from stooping, there's no soft pause waiting for you. No one asks if you're tired. Tiredness in this new life is expected, like breathing or silence. And at the end of every day, you return to the same space, the same mattress, the same look in his eyes, not cruel, not unkind, just entitled. It is not a question, never a question. It is the same nod he gave you on the day you met, the same shrug before he unfastened his doublet. This is what marriage means, and you are a wife. No one told you that being a wife meant being available. Not once, not sometimes, but always. Whether your head aches, whether your back hurts, whether you're angry or frightened or just not ready, none of it matters. You are expected to comply. And if you don't resist, that counts as yes, even if you don't say anything at all. In Tudor England, the concept of marital rights was not just cultural. It was legal. Under English common law, a husband had full access to his wife's body. Marital relations were considered a husband's entitlement, and refusal on the wife's part could be grounds for punishment, or even legal action. Consent wasn't a term that held weight inside marriage. Silence was consent. Obedience was assumed. Some historians argue that not all marriages were like this, that in quieter households among loving partners, there may have been tenderness. And perhaps that's true. But tenderness was not the standard. It was a fortunate exception. For most women, submission was expected nightly, regardless of feeling or circumstance. There was no such thing as not in the mood. You could be ill. You could be grieving. You could be exhausted from childbirth, still bleeding, barely stitched. And yet if your husband wanted you, that was enough. This imbalance was reinforced from every angle, religious, legal, and cultural. The church taught that a woman's body was her husband's to command. Refusing him could be seen as sinful. Disobedience to your husband was disobedience to God. Sermons warned against women who withheld affection, labeling them unnatural or troublesome. A good wife submitted. A silent wife was ideal. And in the absence of affection, you learned to perform stillness. You turned your face to the wall, folded your hands beneath the blanket, and became very quiet. It was easier that way. You began to time it, count the minutes, focus on the fire's crackle, or the rustling of the rushes on the floor. Anything to get through. There's a small crack in the ceiling above the bed, just wide enough to see a sliver of sky if you tilt your head at the right angle. Sometimes you stare at it and think of clouds, of the oak tree by the well, of the birds that used to sing just beyond the orchard wall. These things belong to another life now, a life where your body was still yours. A peculiar tidbit. In some regions of Tudor England, it was believed that a woman's fertility could be improved by eating roasted dove hearts or wearing certain herbs tucked into her bodice at night. Superstition met medicine in strange ways, but none of it was about your comfort, only your usefulness. And what happens if you refuse? If one night you say no, legally nothing protects you. Culturally, everything turns against you. You are his wife. He is your husband. What happens between you is not considered transgression, not by law, not by church, not by the neighbors who would whisper about your defiance, not his. If you persist, if your refusals become regular, There are consequences. Perhaps you're beaten. Not brutally, of course. That would be shameful. But discipline is permitted. The rule of thumb, as it would later be called, referred to the idea that a husband could strike his wife with a rod no thicker than his thumb. That's what made it reasonable. That's what made it legal. Historians debate whether the phrase originated in Tudor England or came later, but the sentiment was alive, and correction was a husband's right. Resistance was a wife's error. And so, like many women, you don't resist. You endure. Quietly. Repeatedly. You begin to feel disconnected from yourself, like your body is a thing that walks, cooks, cleans, and lies still at night. You watch yourself from somewhere just above, hovering between linen sheets and plaster ceilings. Detached. Functional. Numb. Sometimes you wonder if your husband notices, if he sees the way you flinch when he touches your sleeve, if he hears the change in your breathing, if he ever misses the sound of your voice back when you used to speak, before the silence became a shield. You overhear your mother once telling a neighbor that you're settling in, that you're doing your duty. The woman nods. She says it's always hard at first, that you'll learn to be content. Content. Not happy, not joyful, just content. That's the highest hope. And sometimes, when he's fallen asleep, you lie awake and press your palm to your belly, wondering if something has begun to grow there. Not with excitement, not even fear, just curiosity, another duty, another expectation, another body that might soon make demands on yours. You do not feel shame, not exactly. You feel erased. It's strange, this life, how quickly it changes. Just months ago, you were arranging your dolls and daydreaming about picnics. Now your nights are quiet rehearsals of stillness, and your days are a blur of obligation. There's a candle stub in the drawer beside the bed. You haven't lit it in weeks. There's no point. The dark is kinder. And yet even now, even here you find moments, tiny rebellions. You sing softly when no one's around. You braid your hair the way you used to, even if it gets undone. You tuck lavender into your apron, not for him, for you, because the scent reminds you that there is still something in this world that belongs to you alone. You survive in quiet ways. And when the moon is high and the sky beyond the ceiling crack turns silver, you let yourself imagine not escape, not fantasy, just memory. You remember what it was like to run barefoot through the orchard, to laugh too loudly, to speak out of turn. You remember the girl you were, and you promise her you haven't forgotten. Your apron no longer fits quite right. It tightens awkwardly around your middle, and you've begun noticing the small changes. Soreness in your chest and uneasy queasiness in the morning that makes the smell of onions unbearable. You don't need a midwife to tell you. You already know. Everyone does. It's written across your face, your gait, the way older women nod when you pass by with lowered eyes. You've entered the next phase of being a wife, proving yourself through motherhood. You're just 17, or perhaps not even. No one bothers to keep track very closely, and age isn't the point anymore. What matters is your usefulness. And now you are useful in the most expected way. The household is already whispering about it. Your husband's mother has begun preparing swaddling cloths, and your own mother sent a pouch of dried herbs for easing birth pain, tied with a ribbon and a blessing you're not sure you believe in. You don't feel ready, not for the weight in your stomach, not for the pressure in your ribs, and certainly not for the knowledge that your life now, more than ever, is no longer your own. The child growing inside you is less a person than a duty, a test you're expected to pass. Because if you don't, there will be murmurs, maybe even consequences. In Tudor England, a wife's worth was intimately, often exclusively tied to her ability to bear children, preferably boys, quickly, without trouble. The pressure to conceive began almost immediately after marriage. Some women gave birth within a year. Others struggled and were pitied, blamed or quietly replaced through annulment or abandonment. The church encouraged this system with sermons that praised fruitful wives and warned against idleness in the marriage bed. A woman's womb was seen not as a private part of her being, but as communal property belonging to her husband, her family, and the state of England itself. To fail in reproduction was to fail as a woman, and so you endure. Morning sickness is dismissed as weakness. Your swelling feet are ignored. You continue your duties kneading, scrubbing, fetching water, until you nearly faint beside the hearth one afternoon, and are ordered to rest just for a day. But even as you lie down, you know it's temporary. The house does not stop moving, and neither can you. A curious bit of folklore drifts through your mind, something you overheard as a child, that tying an eel's skin around your thigh could ease the pain of labor, or that keeping a silver spoon beneath your pillow would ensure the child's soul entered the world clean. You don't believe it, not really, but still, that spoon is now tucked beneath your bedding, just in case. At night, the pressure in your back becomes a dull, constant ache. Your sleep is shallow, fragmented. Your husband seems pleased enough with your condition. Though he still expects the same duties beneath the sheets, pregnancy doesn't exempt you. If anything, it affirms your role. Your body is fulfilling its purpose. Sometimes you run your fingers over your stomach and whisper things not sweet lullabies, but quiet apologies. For not knowing what to expect, for not being ready, for fearing what might happen next. Because childbirth in your world is not a miracle, it's a gamble. The leading cause of death among women in Tudor England wasn't plague or war, it was childbirth. Fever, bleeding, infection. If you were lucky, you lived to try again. If not, someone else took your place. Life went on. Quietly. You try not to think of that. But the stories creep in anyway. A neighbor's sister who bled out in a birthing chair. A cousin who never opened her eyes again after the second push. A noblewoman down the road whose child was born dead and who stopped speaking for a year. These are not stories told as warnings, they're recited like weather reports. Inevitable. Unremarkable. Just part of being a woman. Historians still argue whether Tudor midwives were truly skilled or merely experienced. Some accounts praise their intuitive understanding of the body and their calming presence. Others suggest they relied too heavily on outdated beliefs and superstition. In truth, they were often both part nurse, part priestess, part magician. Your own midwife has already visited once. She smelled of rosemary and ashes and told you gently not to worry yet. The child is sitting high. She said a good sign. You clung to those words like a blessing. Meanwhile, your household continues preparing. Blankets are aired. Linen is stitched. The birthing room, formerly the pantry, is cleared of sacks and dusted. Your husband barely glances inside. This is not his concern. You spend more and more time, seated hands resting on your belly, waiting. You've stopped trying to read the sky for signs. Everything you need to know is already inside you. There's a quiet there beneath the movements, and the tightness, a kind of stillness that feels older than language. A small, strange tidbit. In some parts of England, it was believed that a woman's cravings during pregnancy could shape the baby's temperament. If you craved apples, the child would be fair-haired. If you longed for meat, the child would be fierce. No one agrees on the meaning of bread. You've been craving bread. You're due any day now, and you're afraid. Not just of the pain or the blood or the fever, but of what happens afterward. If the child is born weak, if it doesn't cry, if it's a girl. A boy would bring relief, celebration. Perhaps even a small gift from your in-laws, a ribbon, a small coin, a loaf of sweetened bread. A girl would be met with a soft sigh and a polite nod. No one would say anything cruel. They wouldn't have to. And then it begins, slow at first, a cramp, a tightening, then another. You say nothing until the fourth, and by then the midwife has already been called. The room is darkened, the windows covered. A single candle flickers in the corner. You are helped into the birthing chair legs, braced hands gripping the wooden arms, polished by countless others. The midwife presses a damp cloth to your brow and mutters prayers under her breath. Hours pass. Maybe days. Time no longer behaves. The pain folds in on itself, wave after wave, until you are no longer speaking, only breathing, barely. Then, with a final searing effort, it's done. A cry pierces the silence. You collapse back, body trembling, vision, swimming. They hold the child up. A boy. You hear the word before you see him, and somewhere inside you a knot loosens. They wrap him in cloth and place him at your breast. You look at him dazed. His fingers curl like question marks. Outside, the fire is dying. You close your eyes, and for the first time in months you sleep. The first days after birth pass in a haze. Your body feels hollowed, unanchored, like someone scooped the center out of you and left the shell to wobble along without direction. You wake and sleep in pieces. Sometimes the baby cries and you respond with instinct alone. Sometimes he doesn't cry, and that's worse. You lean in breath held until you see his tiny chest move like a moth's wing. There's no time to recover, not really. The world outside the confinement chamber, the pantry-turned-birthing room, doesn't stop. There's bread to bake floors, to scrub meals to prepare. And while your mother-in-law brings broth and your neighbor leaves a jar of goose fat for your cracked skin, there's an unspoken understanding that these kindnesses expire quickly. You're a mother now. Congratulations. Back to work. And yet as you re-enter the rhythm of your household, you feel different, not just physically, but fundamentally. You've done something terrifying, something few acknowledge in full. You've carried life, nearly died, bringing it into the world, and now quietly, you're expected to simply fall back into routine. But here's the most unsettling truth. Even after all you've endured, your standing isn't guaranteed. Because if something goes wrong, if the child is sickly, doesn't thrive, or heaven forbid doesn't survive, you're the one who will be blamed. In Tudor England, the burden of successful reproduction rested almost entirely on the woman. While the science of conception was poorly understood, the prevailing belief held that women's bodies were both mysterious and dangerously unstable. If a child was born weak or malformed, suspicion immediately turned to the mother. Had she worked too hard during pregnancy? Had she eaten something impure? Had she thought impious thoughts or harbored secret fears? This belief wasn't just social. It had medical and religious roots. The theory of maternal impression claimed that a mother's emotions diet, or even what she looked at during pregnancy, could permanently mark her child. See a deformed animal. Your baby might be born with a mark. Experience fear during a thunderstorm. Your child may be nervous for life. These notions were more than old wives' tales. They were echoed by physicians and clergymen alike. And so, even though you did everything right, rested, prayed, avoided strong cheeses and sudden noises, you still find yourself watched, especially by other women. They mean well, most of them. But their glances linger on the baby's hands, his eyes, his coloring. And if he cries too often or too little, the silence in the room thickens. You begin to doubt yourself. You remember how your belly dropped a week too soon, how your appetite vanished in the final month. Could that have caused something? You whisper these questions only to yourself. Out loud you smile. You say he's strong. He kicks. He feeds. He's fine. Still some nights he fusses endlessly and you walk him back and forth across the creaking boards until dawn. Your husband sleeps through it mostly. He assumes you know what to do. You're a mother now, surely you've figured it out. But what if you haven't? You think back to a story you overheard as a girl about a woman who miscarried after lifting a heavy pail of water. No one helped her. No one said it wasn't her fault. They just stopped inviting her to market. She moved away within a year. You don't remember her name. There's another tale, a darker one, about a young bride whose baby was born with webbed fingers. People said she must have looked too long at a toad. The child didn't survive. Neither did her reputation. Historians still debate how widespread these superstitions were, and whether women themselves believed them, or simply endured them. Some argue that older midwives helped challenge such ideas in private, offering reassurance. Others suggest these same midwives often reinforced the fears intentionally or not. After all, their own reputations were on the line. Your midwife visits again after a week. She checks your bleeding, your pulse, your milk. She nods with approval, but warns you not to become lazy. A strong womb needs motion, she says, but not too much. You nod. You've learned not to question advice, even when it contradicts the advice from the day before. Your body still hurts. Sitting is difficult. You've begun leaking milk at awkward times, especially when the baby cries. Your hips ache. Your belly is soft and heavy, refusing to return to its earlier form. You wrap it with linen and try not to feel ashamed. This is the shape of survival, you remind yourself. And yet your worth is fragile. If the child falls ill, if your next pregnancy ends too soon, if your milk dries up, you know what they'll say. That something in you is broken, that you did something wrong. A peculiar medical belief of the time, some physicians claimed that if a woman conceived in anger, the child would be unruly. If conceived during grief, the baby might be prone to melancholy. It was your job to remain calm, modest, and spiritually pure, not just for yourself, but for the child's soul. No pressure, right? You start praying more, not out of deep faith, but out of fear. You ask for strength, for health, for forgiveness, for things you don't even understand. You light a candle with a shaking hand and let the wax drip across your fingers before you move it to the hearth. You whisper the baby's name like a spell, and sometimes during the quietest hours you wonder what it would be like to feel joy again. Not relief, not survival, but joy. You look down at the baby in your arms, tiny fists curled mouth slack with sleep. His eyelashes are nearly invisible against his skin, and for a moment something blooms in your chest. A flicker, not quite joy, but close enough to hold on to. You kiss the top of his head and tuck him into the cradle your husband made, or rather repaired. It used to belong to his sister. She died at 20. You don't ask how. You climb back into bed alone. Your husband is away for 2 nights off, tending business with his uncle. You stretch out under the blankets and let your body exhale in a way it hasn't in weeks. The sheets are cool. The fire burns low. Outside, the wind hums softly against the shutters. And though your body still aches, though your heart still worries, you feel for a breath, for a blink like yourself again. Like the girl you used to be before the apron, before the linen bundle, before the night of silence and blood. You don't know how long it will last. Probably not long. There will be more expectations, more children, more glances that weigh and measure. But for now, in this still moment between wakefulness and sleep, you let yourself feel whole. It's not joy, not quite, but it's yours. You've stopped trying to count the weeks since the birth. Time bends strangely now, days blur, and nights stretch long and uneven. The baby sleeps, sometimes wails often, and clings to you in ways that are both comforting and suffocating. Your body, though still stitched together with effort, does not quite feel like yours. It behaves differently. It aches in unexpected places. It pulses with odd sensations that come and go without warning. But the strangest part, the way people speak about you as if you are unwell, but not physically. She's fragile, your mother-in-law says, though you lifted the copper kettle and scrubbed the floors just fine. She seems altered, the midwife murmurs during her second visit, peering into your eyes rather than at your wounds. You want to tell them it's not confusion, it's not hysteria, it's exhaustion, bone-deep, marrow-level weariness. But instead you nod. You smile, because that's easier than explaining what it feels like to live in a body that everyone else sees as broken or misbehaving. You are no stranger to being misunderstood. You were raised on rules and whispered warnings. But now, for the first time, you realize how little room exists in this world for female emotion. Your grief, your worry, your sudden weeping, it doesn't make sense to anyone. So it must be something else, something diagnosable. In Tudor England, there was an explanation for all this. A simple, elegant, entirely incorrect explanation. Your womb. According to physicians of the period, many female ailments, emotional, physical, even spiritual, stemmed from a single root cause, a malfunctioning womb. The term hysteria, from the Greek hystera meaning womb, was used to explain everything from anxiety to seizures. If you wept too often, if you fainted at church, if you struggled to sleep or found yourself forgetful, your womb was probably to blame. It was believed the womb could wander throughout the body, bumping into organs, blocking the heart, even pressing against the brain. This wandering womb caused hysteria, a condition thought to be uniquely feminine. Men didn't have this problem because men conveniently had no uterus. So when you cry for no reason one morning over burnt porridge, or when your hands tremble while folding cloth, no one asks what you need. They don't ask what you've been through. They suggest rose water, or a purgative, or a priest. Your midwife gives you a cloth sachet filled with mint sage and crushed deer hooves. Breathe this when the feelings come, she says. You nod and clutch it because you have nothing else. Historians still debate how seriously people took the idea of a wandering womb. Some believe it was largely symbolic, a convenient way to explain away emotional distress without confronting deeper causes. Others suggest it shaped real medical practices, dangerous ones ranging from smoke therapies to forced confinement. Either way, the result was the same: women were not treated. They were managed. And when management failed, they were blamed. You hear stories of women locked away for weeping too much, of wives sent to monasteries when they refused their husband's bed, of daughters whipped for refusing food. These aren't whispered scandals, they're cautionary tales. You tell them to yourself when your chest tightens, or your thoughts won't settle. It's a warning: do not unravel in public. So you keep your voice steady. You keep your eyes lowered. You take the sage-infused cloth and pretend it helps. You do not mention the times you feel your pulse in your teeth, or how the crying no longer surprises you. It's the calm moments that do. A curious tidbit: one physician of the Tudor era claimed that strong-smelling herbs like rue and asafoetida could lure the womb back to its proper place. Women were instructed to inhale the scent deeply. Some accounts even describe herbs being burned beneath a chair, while the woman sat above it, skirt lifted, hoping to smoke the womb back down. You tried this once, quietly. The smell was awful and your throat burned for days. But afterward, people said you looked better, less pale, more settled. You weren't. But it didn't matter. Their relief was more important than your truth. And here's what you begin to notice. It isn't the pain itself that exhausts you. It's the performance of healing, the smiles, the nods, the careful way you describe your symptoms so they don't sound too much. Because if you slip, if you say the wrong thing, the treatment becomes something else. They might suggest isolation, a spiritual intervention, or worse, that the baby be taken elsewhere for your peace of mind. You've heard of this happening too, so you keep the baby close. You hum to him softly as you hang the washing. You talk to him when no one else is around, using a voice that still sounds like yours. And when he sleeps, you sit beside the hearth and let your eyes unfocus, staring into the fire until your breath slows. These are the only moments that feel like rest. Your husband notices you're quiet, but he doesn't name it. He assumes it's womanly, natural. He tells you once that all mothers go a bit soft in the head after birth and then laughs. You smile because it's safer that way. You wonder sometimes if other women feel this too. You suspect they do. You see it in their eyes the way they glance away quickly when you ask how they're managing. You see it in the bruises hidden by shawls in the forced cheer at church. You know this quiet struggle has 1,000 names, though none are spoken aloud. And yet despite it all, you keep going. You wake each morning and dress your child with tender hands. You brew tea for your husband and sweep the floor before the baby stirs. You tend the garden in silence, and on good days, days when your breath stays steady and the tears wait until evening, you feel like yourself again. Not completely, but enough, because you are still here, still standing. Even with a body that aches, and a heart that stumbles, you have not fallen. Not yet. And that matters. You remind yourself of this when the headaches come, when the fear creeps in for no reason, when your knees shake as you carry the water in from the well. You remind yourself this is your body and it carried you through blood and fire. They may call it fragile. They may call it hysterical. But you know the truth. It is strong. It is surviving. It is yours. The room has been darkened for days. Heavy linen hangs over the windows, blotting out the July sun, and the fire burns low in the hearth, even though it's hot enough to make the air shimmer. You are not to be moved, not to be disturbed. This is your lying in, they say, a time of rest, of healing. But what it feels like is confinement. You've been here since the birth. The baby is close bundled in swaddling and sleeping beside you. His small sound sighs, hiccups, the occasional wheeze are your only companions. Visitors are kept away and the household moves with hushed voices beyond the thick wooden door. The world which once pressed in from all sides has receded. Now it is just you, your child, and the slow beat of recovery. In Tudor England, women were expected to lie in for up to 40 days after childbirth, depending on social class and local custom. This was both a medical precaution and a religious tradition. The idea was to give the woman time to heal and, more importantly, to become clean again in the eyes of the church. Until she was churched or formally blessed by a priest, she was considered spiritually impure. You find this strange. The birth was not a sin. It was your duty, your proof of womanhood. And yet here you are, cut off, treated like a vessel that needs to be wiped clean before it can rejoin society. The room you've been placed in was once a storage chamber for herbs and root vegetables. They cleared it out hastily, your husband's idea, he said, since it was the quietest room in the house. Now it's been swept and warmed, lined with clean cloths and soft rushes. Someone even set a carved angel on the mantel, though the paint is chipping and one wing has broken off. You're not ungrateful. The space is calm. But the silence can be too loud sometimes, especially at night when the baby cries and there's no one to help you sit up or change the linen. Your body still feels like it belongs to someone else, sore, slow, hollow. You press your hand to your belly where the child once stretched your skin tight, and feel only softness and bruises now. The midwife checks in each day, bringing warm water and strange poultices made of wine herbs and rose petals. She smells of thyme and ashes, and her hands are rough but careful. She says little, only nods and makes notes in her head. She tells you the bleeding is normal, the pain will pass, the milk will settle. And then she disappears again like a ghost slipping through a wall. One morning you ask when you'll be allowed outside. She frowns. Not before the bleeding stops. And then, as if sensing your impatience, she adds, "There's danger in moving too soon. Childbed fever." Those words echo louder than she intends. Childbed fever, what modern medicine calls puerperal infection, was one of the leading causes of death for women in childbirth during the Tudor period. The infection could set in days or even weeks after delivery, sometimes without warning. High fever delirium, unbearable pain, often fatal, and no one knew exactly how it spread. Some blamed bad air, others blamed imbalanced humors or divine punishment. But we now know what they didn't, that it often came from the hands of those meant to help, midwives or attendants, who move from one birth to the next, without washing, carrying infection between women, unknowingly. You remember this now when your fever rises slightly one night. It passes by morning, but the fear lingers like a second shadow. Historians still argue how aware Tudor-era practitioners were of contagion. Some midwives seem to sense a connection between cleanliness and outcomes, boiling cloths, burning old linens, but without understanding the science. Others followed custom more than caution, and women paid the price. You count your blessings. You are not fevered. Your child is feeding. You are not bleeding too heavily. But you've heard stories. Too many. A neighbor 2 doors down, Agnes, died last winter after her 3rd birth. They say she was churched too early, that she walked to the chapel before her body was ready. Her baby survived. She did not. So you remain still. You sip broth. You listen to the wind through the walls and the baby's breath and the fire's soft crackle. And you wait. There's an old superstition you remember from your mother's stories, that the devil visits the birthing room during the 3rd night, testing the woman's soul while she sleeps. To ward him off, a bowl of iron nails should be placed under the bed, and a Bible should rest open at the book of Psalms. You don't have any nails, but someone left a Bible on the table near your cot. And though you can't read much beyond the familiar phrases, you keep it open anyway, just in case. Your husband has not visited in 3 days. He says it's better this way, gives you time to rest. You're not sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. Sometimes the housemaid brings the baby to him for a moment in the main room, and when she returns, she says, "He smiled." You nod, even though you know the baby is too young for that. It doesn't matter. It makes everyone feel better. You try to find joy in small things. The smell of lavender on the cloth bundle near your pillow. The warmth of the child when he sleeps on your chest. The first time your body moves without pain. You measure your healing not in days, but in moments of quiet that don't hurt. And then one morning the bleeding slows. The aches fade to a dull hum. You are permitted to rise and walk to the window. You pull aside the linen covering just a bit and look out. The garden is still there. The rosemary bush survived the frost. 2 chickens peck beneath the wall. Life continued without you, but you are still part of it. The following Sunday you're taken to the chapel. Your head is covered, your steps slow. The priest reads a short blessing, and your name is spoken aloud for the first time in weeks. You are cleansed, purified, as if giving life was something that required pardon. A strange tidbit in some parishes. Women brought offerings to their churching loaves of bread, beeswax candles, even coins sewn into their sleeves. These tokens weren't mandatory, but they were expected. A kind of spiritual transaction. I survived. Here is my thanks. You leave the chapel with your baby in your arms, sunlight on your cheeks for the first time in over a month. The air is sharper than you remember. You breathe in deeply, and for a moment, everything else fades. The pain, the silence, the expectations. You are alive. Your child is alive. And while no one celebrates this fact out loud, it pulses through you like a second heartbeat. It's not victory. Not exactly. But it's something. By the time the 3rd moon has passed, the household has returned to its usual rhythm, and you are expected to do the same. The linens don't wash themselves. The stews don't stir without a hand, and the child, still so small and red-faced, needs near constant care. Your own needs, rest, recovery, peace, are politely set aside. After all, you've survived childbirth. What more could you ask for? There's a quiet pressure in the way people look at you now. It's not unkind, but it assumes that you are mended, that your womb is settled, that your mind is clear again, your hands steady, your purpose restored. You are a wife after all, a mother. Your place is here among the boiling pots and dusting cloths, as if nothing inside you has changed. But you have changed. It's in the way you move now, more slowly, more deliberately. In the way you glance at your baby as if to make sure he's real. In the way you listen more closely to your own breath. when the room grows still. You don't speak of these things aloud. There is no place for that. Instead, you begin to stitch. A simple cloth, nothing fancy. But in each thread you sew, you place a small part of yourself. It's your way of saying, I am still here. I have hands that can make, not just serve. A mind that can wander, not just wait. There's no celebration for surviving what you've been through. No feast or song or chorus of grateful neighbors. Just a nod, a return to routine, and the occasional pat on the shoulder from someone who says, you're strong. As if strength were a reward instead of a necessity. Still, there are moments, quiet ones, when you catch your reflection in the polished side of a kettle or in the river's stillness. And you see a face that is older, yes, a little more hollowed, but also somehow stronger. That strength didn't come from being fearless. It came from surviving fear. In Tudor England, survival was not guaranteed. For mothers, the weeks after childbirth were the most dangerous of their lives. Infection, blood loss, and sheer exhaustion claimed lives daily. Yet these women got up, dressed their wounds, fed their babies, stirred the pot again. A curious tidbit, some Tudor women celebrated their churching day by secretly placing a small flower in their bodice afterward, not for the priest, but for themselves. A personal token, a whispered reminder that they had lived through something sacred and brutal, and come out the other side. You understand that now. The sacred and the brutal often share the same space. When your baby laughs for the first time, a real laugh, not a hiccup or a gurgle, it feels like something shifts, like a weight lifts that you didn't realize you were still carrying. You laugh with him, surprised at the sound of your own voice. It's lighter than you remember, and in that moment you feel it, not victory, not even peace, but something gentler. A softness that arrives not from being untouched, but from being touched by fire and still reaching for warmth. You begin to believe that there's more to your story than this one chapter, and so you keep going. You rise with the dawn swaddle your son set water to boil, and hum a tune you don't remember learning. Life doesn't pause, but it does offer brief golden hours when the baby sleeps against your chest, and the morning sun slips through the shutters that feel like something close to grace. Maybe one day this will be remembered, or maybe it won't. But either way, you were here. You lived it. And that is enough. The world outside your village is wide and strange, filled with other women, other rules, other lives. And while your Tudor tale is not over yet, it's time to step gently beyond it now into quieter chambers and grander palaces, where other women too carried burdens in silence. You draw the curtain closed, press a soft kiss to your child's brow, and breathe deeply, because this next part, it's not yours alone. It's theirs too. And we begin. The palace at Versailles is silent tonight. Silent in the way only a place so extravagant can be. The halls are dim with candlelight, the air tinged with the scent of wax-powdered wigs and roses past their prime. Somewhere behind these gilded doors, music still murmurs from a harpsichord in a distant salon, but here where you stand in a room not quite your own, the world has become terribly, uncomfortably still. You are not poor. You are not unknown. You are in fact a young bride of impeccable lineage, married just this morning, to a man of title and rank. Your dress has not yet been unfastened. Your hair is still arranged in the height of court fashion, and your lips, painted faintly with crushed carmine, tremble ever so slightly beneath your polite smile. Tonight is not yours to savor. It is to be witnessed. In the royal courts of 17th and 18th century France, especially under the reigns of Louis XIV and Louis XV, the consummation of a noble marriage was not only expected, but documented. Witnesses might stand outside the room, sometimes just beyond a parted curtain. The sheets, too, could be inspected afterward, not out of prurient curiosity, but for political necessity. This is not a story about love or even desire. It's about legitimacy. The marriage bed in many aristocratic households was an extension of diplomacy. It was not uncommon for families to publicly confirm that their daughters were virginal, not through conversation, but through physical proof. A single spot of blood on the sheets could affirm a family's honor, secure a dowry, or even strengthen alliances. You sit on the edge of a bed piled high with embroidered linens, your stomach clenched not with fear exactly, but with an overwhelming sense of performance. You've been dressed like a queen, fed like a princess, paraded like a trophy, and now you are expected to become a seal on a contract. There is no conversation, no question of whether you feel ready. The man who enters the room, your husband, technically says little. He is young nervous, perhaps just as terrified as you, but his task is clear, as is yours. Historians still debate how often this sort of physical inspection truly occurred. Some accounts suggest it was more symbolic than literal. Others imply it happened frequently among high-ranking families, where inheritance was at stake. In either case, the pressure to prove a bride's virginity was deeply real, regardless of whether the evidence was actually reviewed. You think of the odd instructions whispered by your mother before the ceremony. "Stay still," she said not unkindly. "Don't cry. They'll think you're weak. Smile, but not too widely. They'll say you're pleased. And remember, it's just one night. Then it's done." But of course it's not. The politics don't end at the altar. They follow you into bed, into the silence afterward, into the whispered gossip that will float through corridors tomorrow. What no one told you is how much of this hurts, not just physically, but existentially. That something invisible will shift inside you tonight. That even if no blood stains the sheets, something else will have been surrendered the illusion of personal agency. In the morning, you are expected to rise early, greet the household, and behave as if nothing has changed. If the servants noticed anything amiss, too little blood, too many tears, they say nothing. Instead, they pour your tea and offer congratulations. Your body becomes a thing to be evaluated. Your belly is watched for signs of swelling. Your appetite, your complexion, even your posture become subjects of discussion. Are you blooming or barren? Will there be an heir? The scrutiny is endless, but you play your role because there is no script for protest. In Versailles, where mirrors line entire walls, and courtiers pass like ghosts and silk appearances are everything, even your discomfort must be beautifully arranged. Yet behind the marble columns and golden trim, women whispered secrets to one another, tricks passed down through maids or cousins. How to hide bruises with rice powder, how to fake signs of bleeding using dried sheep's blood or wine, how to manage a husband's expectations with strategic timing or fabricated illness. A curious tidbit. In certain French noble houses, women were rumored to pre-stain sheets the day before the wedding night, especially if they feared the outcome. These bloody linens would be presented as proof, regardless of what had truly happened. It was a deception, born not from shame, but survival. And you understand that now. It's not about whether the act happened. It's about whether it appeared to have happened correctly. The truth, it seems, is not always the point. As weeks pass, your days settle into the pattern expected of a noble wife. Morning audiences, afternoon embroidery, long walks in the manicured gardens where fountains murmur secrets, and marble statues stare silently at nothing. Your husband attends court most evenings, and you're left to dine with older women who talk of pregnancies and palace intrigues as if they were seasons. You nod politely, you ask no questions. In time, you learn that some women carve small joys into this life, a favorite lute song, a warm cloak, a trusted maid who brings real news instead of the fluff approved by the court. These tiny rebellions keep you from dissolving entirely into the image of yourself. And every month that passes without a child, you feel the pressure rise. You try to be hopeful. You eat the soups they say are good for fertility. You attend Mass. You smile for the Queen. But inside something aches not just in your womb, but in your sense of self. Because unlike what the painting suggests, you are not only here to be beautiful and fertile, you are also a person. It's a thought you dare not say aloud, but it keeps you warm in the cold echoing halls. Historians still argue whether women of Versailles wielded more power than they appeared to. Some did, especially mistresses or queens with political acumen, but most remained decorative symbolic, useful only so long as they were pleasing and productive. You are beginning to understand the cost of being born into a story that wasn't written by you. Still, there is kindness. Not grand sweeping kindness, but quiet gestures. The lady-in-waiting who sneaks sugar cubes into your handkerchief. The older duchess who squeezes your fingers when she sees your eyes cloud. Even your husband, awkward though he is, begins to ask after your health with something resembling sincerity. It's not romance, but it is something human. You begin to build your own rituals. At night before bed, you write a few lines in a hidden notebook. Not poetry, just thoughts. A moment you liked, a flower you noticed, a scent that reminded you of your childhood. These become your grounding stones. And slowly you learn that even here in this fortress of appearances, you can still feel things that are real. The first time you laugh, not a courtly titter, but a real unguarded laugh, it startles even you. It comes when one of the footmen trips and splashes tea on a nobleman's powdered wig, and everyone gasps and you, unable to help yourself, burst into a laugh that rings down the corridor. For a moment you are not a bride, not a noblewoman, not a symbol. You are simply alive. And that in Versailles is rare. You begin to see the women around you differently now, not as rivals or ornaments, but as survivors in their own ways. Each one carving a space where she can breathe, however narrow. Some do it through art, others through influence of few. Through defiance so subtle it looks like etiquette. And so you breathe too. You plant lavender in a hidden corner of the garden and visit it each week. You commission a painting, but ask the artist to depict you without a corset. You tell your maid a joke and listen as she tries shyly to laugh. These are not acts of revolution, but they are yours. And perhaps that is enough. Because the truth is, your story did not begin or end on a wedding night, or with a blood-stained sheet. It began the moment you realized you still existed underneath all the layers. That your spirit, though carefully dressed, was not erased. And now that you know this, you will not forget it. You brush your hands along the velvet of your gown. You lift your chin as you pass the mirrored hall. You let the rumors swirl, and the gowns rustle, and the bells chime. But you walk taller. You survived the performance. You learned the lines. But now, quietly, you are writing new ones of your own. Because in every grand court, behind every golden mask, there are women like you, waiting, watching, remembering, and somewhere beyond Versailles, in a world with different rules and different chains, another woman prepares to walk her own narrow path. Let's go meet her. You have heard of Edo before whispers of a city far to the east, where cherry blossoms bloom like clouds, and silence carries more weight than speech. But now you are in it. You walk its narrow streets past paper lanterns and lacquered doors dressed in a kimono that binds your steps to half-length strides. Your feet do not echo on the wooden boards. Your presence is muted as it should be. You are the wife of a samurai now, and that means many things. Mostly it means that your desires, if you ever had any, are no longer part of the conversation. Marriage in Tokugawa Japan, particularly for the samurai class, was not built on affection or even mutual compatibility. It was a mechanism of status alliance and discipline. You had a role, and it was not to dream. Your husband trained in the martial arts, and the literature of honor spends his days either practicing the way of the sword or attending to the affairs of his clan. He speaks little, eats quickly, and bows without meeting your eyes. You have learned not to expect more. On your wedding night, there were no candles, no soft words, only procedure. In the hush of your new home, the futons were laid, and the silence between you and him stretched as wide as a battlefield. Whatever happened in that room was done with precision and purpose. The next morning, tea was served, and neither of you spoke of it again. In Edo period Japan, in 1603-1868, samurai wives were expected to uphold the household's dignity through obedience and restraint. Love, as you might imagine, it was not the foundation, it was at best a fortunate accident. Your primary roles were to maintain the home, bear children, preferably sons, and manage the servants if your household had any. Anything beyond that belonged in the realm of poetry and theater. But you were not a poem. You were a wife. Still, as you light incense in the early hours and sweep the Ingawa porch with careful strokes, you find space for small thoughts. What if you could read that book your husband left open on the table? What if you could speak freely with your sister-in-law about your sadness, without it being seen as weakness? Historians still argue about the degree of agency women held during the Edo period. While the samurai code Bushido emphasized loyalty and submission, there were records of women engaging in letter-writing poetry, and even secret romances. Yet those exceptions were often punished harshly when discovered. The risk of dishonor was enough to silence most. There is a scroll hanging in your home, a painted proverb that reads, "The nail that sticks out gets hammered down." You have read it so many times it now feels tattooed behind your eyelids. So you remain smooth and round, never catching, never protruding. You bow deeper. You answer before being asked. You smile in the precise ratio of serenity and invisibility. But still your mind wanders. One day you hear of a woman, just a whisper of a tale, who refused to be silent. She had fallen in love with a traveling musician and was found exchanging letters. Her husband, a minor official, banished her to her family's rural home. Her story circulated among the women of the district, not as scandal, but as legend. They did not praise her folly. They envied her courage. You wonder if no one had known, would her story have ended differently? If you had known her, would you have dared to ask her what the letter said? A quirky tidbit. In some households, women would secretly compose haiku about their emotional lives, sorrow, desire, or joy, and hide them between the pages of prayer books. One such poem found centuries later read, "He speaks of honor, but not once of my laughter. Still I light the lamp." You find yourself thinking of that unknown poet as you go about your days. When your husband returns, you prepare the bath. You bow at the right moment. You listen as he shares news of another duel, another dispute. You nod and say nothing, but inside a line of poetry forms just for you. When the moon is high and the house is finally still, you sit at the low writing table. The inkstone is cool under your fingers, and though you know the rules, you let yourself write. Not a declaration, not a rebellion, just a verse, small and hidden but yours. In the world of Edo, disobedience was not always loud. Sometimes it was simply continuing to think. There are days when the silence stretches too far, when the emptiness of routine presses against your ribs. On those days you walk to the shrine nearby. You do not pray for happiness. You pray for balance, for the strength to be two things at once dutiful and still human. Some women had worse. Others had more freedom, especially among the merchant class. But for the wives of samurai, the rules were clear and carved deep. Any misstep could bring disgrace, not just on you, but your entire family. So you stay within the lines even as you begin to map the spaces between them. A moment of unexpected connection one afternoon, you share tea with your mother-in-law. She is quiet, observant. Then out of nowhere she says, "When I was your age, I thought I would die of silence." You look up startled. She does not say more, but in her gaze you see understanding. and for the first time you feel less alone. This, too, is history, not the grand tales of war or empire, but the quiet passing of understanding between women. One glance, one sentence, one breath held and then released. It is in these glances and breaths that you begin to locate your resilience. You start planting herbs. You tend them daily. You begin to notice the first curl of a new leaf. You memorize the sound of rain against the tiled roof. You find poetry in the routine, not because it redeems your circumstance, but because it affirms your presence. You exist, and you are watching. You are not the nail. You are the grain of the wood, shaped but not splintered. And one evening, long after the lanterns have dimmed, and the house rests in hushed repose, your husband sits beside you with a bowl of pickled plum. He does not speak, but he does not leave. And after a moment you realize this is his version of kindness. You accept it, not because it is perfect, but because it is something. In the soft darkness of the tatami room, you sip your tea. You watch the steam curl upward. You imagine the ink drying on your secret poem. And for now, in this moment, that is enough. Another woman waits for us now in a land of corsets and covered lamps. Let's take a quiet step toward her. The parlor smells faintly of lavender and starch. A fire crackles behind the ornate grate, but it's mostly for show. You're seated upright, never slouching in a dress that took nearly an hour to fasten your hair, pinned into something that's meant to look effortless but required half a dozen hairpins, and a lady's maid with strong wrists. Outside, the carriages roll by in a steady rhythm, but inside your home in Victorian England, everything is still and quiet. Because even after marriage, silence remains the posture of a respectable woman. You do not raise your voice even in delight. You do not laugh too loudly. You certainly do not mention your desires even to your husband, especially to your husband. In this polite, polished world, S3X isn't denied, it's simply unspoken. The marital bedroom is a subject avoided in most drawing rooms, and in respectable publications it's mentioned only as a sacred duty, or not at all, and yet it governs much of your life. You may have married for love, or maybe for a good match. But regardless of how the match was made once the vows were exchanged, the expectations began, and they were one-sided. Victorian ideals, particularly in the mid-19th century, framed women as the angel in the house, pure passive, and above carnal matters. You were expected to endure physical intimacy, not enjoy it. To participate out of duty, not desire. To preserve your virtue, even in marriage somehow, by being modest, obedient, and silent. This strange paradox, being both wife and untouched saint, left many women in emotional limbo. Your body might be claimed by marriage, but your spirit was expected to float above it all, serene and selfless. Historians still debate the extent to which Victorian women internalized or resisted these ideals. Personal diaries and private letters suggest a more complex reality. Some women indeed felt ashamed of their own desire, while others found quiet ways to express it, often through coded language or shared stories passed between friends behind closed doors. For you, the rules are clear. You do not initiate affection. You do not show too much response. You remain still polite and emotionally composed. If you cry, it must be attributed to nerves or exhaustion. If you feel nothing, you are told you are normal. And if you feel too much, you're warned it's dangerous. The concept of female desire, particularly when overt, was treated with suspicion. Medical authorities, almost exclusively male, classified sexual interest in women as a potential sign of hysteria or moral failing. Treatments ranged from cold baths to enforced bed rest, to the administration of sedatives or electrical therapy. You're aware of one neighbor who was quietly sent away for becoming too emotional after childbirth. Her house is still drawn, her husband unreadable. So you learn to swallow every question, every longing, every doubt. Your own feelings become something to manage, like the house accounts or the flower arrangements. You keep them orderly, presentable, and tucked away where no one will trip over them. And you are not alone. Among your friends, Mary, who jokes about headaches with too much frequency; Agnes, who drinks a little too much sherry when her husband is out; Louise, who writes poetry no one is allowed to read. There is a silent bond. None of you say it aloud, but you all know. You are all playing roles. A quirky tidbit. Some Victorian etiquette guides actually advised brides to lie back with eyes closed during intimacy, ideally without moving or speaking, so as to preserve modesty. One infamous quote from a popular manual advised, "Give little indication that the marital act has taken place at all." This was not considered cruel. It was considered dignified. You wonder how many generations of women nodded along, then cried quietly into lace pillows. You have begun to write letters never sent, of course. Just pages folded and tucked into the bottom of a hat box. In them you tell no one in particular how strange this life feels, how dressed up and dried out it has become, how the love you imagine now resembles an etiquette exercise. Your husband is not cruel. He is gentle in his own way. But he has never asked what you enjoy. The idea would shock him. He performs his duties with punctuality and consideration, then leaves you to rest. You hear his footsteps fade down the hallway, always precisely 12 paces. Then the click of the study door. Then nothing. You imagine another version of him, one who might linger, one who might ask softly what you think about when you're alone. But that man exists only in your letters, and yet there is kindness in other places. Your maid who notices when you're pale and brings ginger tea without asking. Your younger sister who sends little watercolors with silly captions and misspelled words that make you laugh. Even the house cat who curls against your ankle each evening as if to say, "I see you." Historians still argue whether the repression of the Victorian era was as total as we imagine. In private, many women found ways to subvert the system. Some became writers, authors of novels and stories that hinted at passion beneath their pages. Others led double lives pursuing affairs or friendships that gave them space to breathe. A few even petitioned for divorce, rare, scandalous, but not unheard of. You think about that sometimes. Not divorce, but the idea of choice. What would it feel like just once to choose? One afternoon, while sorting your embroidery silks, you come across a letter from your school days. It's from Eleanor, the girl who taught you how to braid your hair with ribbon. She wrote, "Do you ever feel like we were trained to be ghosts before we even knew what it was to be girls?" You never answered, but now her words hum through your bones. You light a candle. You take out the old stationery, and for the first time in years you write her back. You don't say everything, but you say enough. Enough to crack the silence. And you begin to wonder, what else might be possible? Not tomorrow, not publicly, but in the quiet folds of your own mind, you begin to imagine a different way. You plant ivy instead of roses in the garden. You start reading novels that make you feel something, even if you have to hide them behind cookbooks. You teach your maid to read slowly after supper, and when you look in the mirror, you stop adjusting your expression. You let yourself see what's really there, because perhaps the greatest rebellion isn't rage or escape. It's refusing to go invisible. You are still here, still thinking, still whole. The rules are still written by others, but your thoughts are yours and they will not be silenced. Somewhere far from these gas-lit streets, another woman waits, not in a parlor, but behind embroidered curtains of a very different palace. And she too is carving out her space. Shall we meet her? Silk slippers brush across marble floors, nearly silent, nearly weightless. You walk in a slow rhythm, not because you're tired, but because every step is watched. You are not alone. You are never alone. The scent of amber and rose clings to the air, thick as honey. Behind embroidered curtains and gilded latticework, Your world in the Ottoman harem is beautiful and bounded. You are a consort now, or perhaps only a favored attendant. It hardly matters. Either way, your days are structured around the Sultan's whims and the rituals of the harem. Your clothing is luxurious, but your movements are calculated. Your gaze is trained downward, and your future rests on a complicated game of favor fertility and flawless behavior. Here, S3X is not shameful. It is currency. The harem of the Topkapi Palace in the 16th century was not simply a private pleasure dome. It was a political institution. Hundreds of women lived there, many brought from foreign lands, gifted as tribute, or taken through conquest. They were educated, trained in music, poetry, and court etiquette, and ranked in an intricate hierarchy that placed the Sultan's mother at the top. For those below, every promotion and every danger centered around one thing: access to the Sultan's bed. If you were chosen, you might rise. Bear a son, and your name could echo through the empire. Be overlooked too long or speak out of turn, and you might find yourself quietly sent to the old palace, forgotten by history. Historians still debate the true power of harem women. Some argue that women like Hurrem Sultan, who went from enslaved concubine to legal wife and political advisor, proved that real influence was possible. Others suggest that such stories are rare exceptions, not the rule. For most, the harem was a velvet prison soft, but inescapable. And for you, it's complicated. You've learned the choreography, the way to bow just enough to speak just little enough. You attend music lessons, embroidery circles, and storytelling gatherings led by the elder women. You bathe in marble pools beneath ceilings painted with stars. But always you feel the pressure like eyes behind the screen, like strings pulling your every move. Desire here is not yours to express. It is something you must embody without owning. You are trained to be graceful, pleasing, demure, but not too forward, never too assertive. You must entice but never demand. Present beauty, but never control. And so you learn the art of absence, of not speaking your longings aloud. There's a tidbit you overheard once whispered between two laundresses in the harem's back corridors, that one favored consort gained influence not by beauty, but by mastering the art of storytelling. Each evening she would spin tales so vivid of distant deserts, jeweled snakes, and cursed princes, that the Sultan delayed his duties just to listen. They say he fell asleep mid-story once and asked her to finish it the next day. She became a legend not for her body but her voice. You clutch that story close, because while you are trained to be seen, you begin to crave being heard. There are nights when you lie awake on silk cushions, the air warm against your skin, and you wonder if you vanish tomorrow, would anyone remember your laughter, your favorite color, the way you hum old songs while brushing your hair. Some women here thrive in the competition. They sharpen their smiles like knives. Others grow quiet, fading into the patterned walls, becoming part of the background tapestry. You try not to become either. Instead, you find solace in small rituals. You water the potted jasmine sprig near your window. You trace old poems into the steam on the bathhouse mirrors. You memorize the stars outside the dome at night, assigning them names no one else knows. You begin writing verses in the margins of court documents, tiny, illegible, but yours. And sometimes there are moments when a fellow woman catches your eye and offers a smile not of rivalry, but of recognition. When an older matron whispers, "That melody you played, it reminded me of my home." When a younger girl asks you, "Did it hurt the first time?" and you answer not with words, but with a hand gently placed over hers. In those moments you are more than decoration, more than function. You are a witness to other women's lives, and they to yours. There's no promise of safety here. Affection from the Sultan can be fleeting. Jealous rivals can rise overnight. Even the Sultan's mother, powerful as she is, can fall out of favor. The harem's rules are fluid, but the walls are not. And yet you survive. You adapt. You learn that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the subtle tilt of the head, the carefully chosen silence, the well-timed story. You remember the old saying, the lion sleeps, but the lioness waits. That's what you do. You wait not idly, but deliberately. And while you wait, you live, quietly, cleverly, and on your terms, even if those terms are written in invisible ink. When the Sultan next visits, you are ready, but not desperate. You have braided your hair with golden thread, not for him, but for yourself. You have prepared a song, not one that flatters, but one that tells a story of longing and home. You look him in the eye just for a second longer than necessary, and in that moment you know you are not powerless. You are practiced, you are poised, and above all you are patient. The night ends, maybe with favor, maybe not, but you light your oil lamp, and by its glow you read a poem you wrote last week. No one else knows it exists, but you do, and that in a place like this is a victory. Now let's drift backward in time toward the banks of the Nile, where another woman waits surrounded by incense and expectations. The walls are painted with stories, gods with animal heads, women in graceful profile eyes outlined in charcoal. The light flickers from shallow oil lamps, casting soft gold onto limestone and woven mats. You sit beside a clay basin, filled with water and lotus petals, the scent rising like a prayer. In this house along the Nile, your title is clear, even if your name has been forgotten by history. You are a wife in ancient Egypt, and your worth begins and may well end with your ability to bear children. Not just any children, sons. You are told that motherhood is your highest honor, and in many ways this isn't untrue. Egyptian society, more than many others of its time, held women in relatively high esteem. You can own property, initiate divorce, and appear in court. Your marriage was not arranged as a strict contract, but often began with mutual affection, or at least mutual benefit. But affection alone won't protect you if you fail to conceive, because here fertility isn't just a personal milestone, it's a sacred duty. The gods are watching, especially Hathor and Isis. Statues of them fill your chambers, stone figures with rounded hips and protective hands. You wear fertility amulets strung with carnelian beads. You sip herbal concoctions made of dates, honey, and ground roots. Some say crocodile dung dried, then inserted, can ward off evil spirits and prevent undesired conception. A tidbit you've never tested, though your neighbor swears by it. Every month you wait. Every missed moon is cause for celebration or despair. If the moon comes and you are still empty, you visit the temple priestesses. They press their hands to your belly and chant. They burn papyrus offerings. They tell you to sleep with your feet pointed west, toward the setting sun where rebirth begins. You obey. Historians still debate how much agency Egyptian women truly had. Official records depict them as respected figures, sometimes even priestesses or physicians, but private letters and graffiti suggest a more complex reality. One hieratic scroll describes a woman returned to her father's house after failing to conceive for 3 seasons. Another hints at bitter herbs used when a pregnancy was not wanted, though the language is deliberately vague. And for you, there is pressure, but not cruelty. Not yet. Your husband still brings you fresh figs from the market. He still oils your back after temple prayers. But his mother has begun asking more pointed questions. She leaves statuettes of Taweret, the goddess of childbirth, in conspicuous places. She comments on the neighbor's new baby with too much enthusiasm. You feel the expectations gathering like clouds before the flood season. And when the day finally comes, when your stomach swells and your body shifts, you are both relieved and afraid. Pregnancy is sacred, but it is also dangerous. Midwives chant protection spells over your sleeping form. They tie protective knots in your bedding and slip charms under your mattress. You are fed sweetbreads and instructed to avoid the river at night. Your body becomes a temple under construction, every part watched, every movement sacred. When labor begins, you are surrounded by women. They press warm cloths to your brow, rub oil into your belly, and sing songs older than memory. You squat on birthing bricks painted with images of Hathor, your arms wrapped around wooden posts, your breath shallow and fast. The room is hot, fragrant with myrrh and sweat. And then pain silenced then the cry. A child, yours. There are no trumpets, no scribes recording the moment. But someone brings wine. Someone else weeps in quiet relief. You are exhausted, but you are here, and the child in your arms is real. If it is a son, you are praised. If it is a daughter, you are congratulated gently with a promise that next time may be different. You recover in the cool shade of your house courtyard. Dates and honey are brought to you. Incense burns, and you look at the infant beside you, wondering what this world will make of them. You are stronger now. Not just because you endured the birth, but because you have passed the test that no one dared name. Your husband's mother smiles for the first time in weeks. She brings you a basket of carob and touches your arm with something like gratitude. You think perhaps you are safe for a while, but you also know there will be another test, another moon cycle, another set of expectations. And yet there is sweetness here too. You teach your child to clap hands to temple songs. You draw little pictures on papyrus scraps to amuse them. You walk them to the edge of the river and point at the ibis birds. Watch you whisper. They remember the way home. One day you find your own quiet ritual. When everyone else sleeps, you sit beneath the stars and tell your story not aloud, but in the language of soft breath and stillness. You tell yourself, I was here. I mattered. Even if no scribe records your name, even if the stones forget your face, the night remembers your warmth. And across the sea, across the centuries, another woman waits. She is hidden behind columns and rules. Her feet make no sound. Her voice has not yet been heard. Let's go to her now. The sun is out, but it barely touches you. You are standing just inside the threshold of your home in ancient Greece. Your husband's home, really peering through the linen curtain that shields the women's quarters from the outside world. You don't step past it. You know better. This is not just cloth. It's a boundary. On the other side is the world of men, the symposiums, the politics, the city square debates, carved into the very stones of Athens. On your side, silence, needlework, repetition. In this world, to be a woman is to be invisible in plain sight. From the moment you could walk without falling, you were taught to avert your eyes and measure your voice. Not because anyone told you so directly, though sometimes they did, but because it was how every other woman around you moved. You mimicked the shuffle, the stillness, the quiet refusal to interrupt. You live now in the gynaeconitis, the women's quarters, far from the andron, where men recline and speak of empire. You may never see a philosopher in the flesh. You will likely never hear your own name spoken in a court of law, but you will memorize every shift in your husband's mood, the rhythm of the household, the needs of your sons. Because this too is a kind of politics. Ancient Greek society, particularly in classical Athens, placed strict limits on women. You could not vote own property independently or initiate divorce without serious risk. Even your funeral, if it came too young, would be simpler than a man's. Reserved, controlled, and the rules governing intimacy were equally imbalanced. As a wife, your role was to bear legitimate heirs, preferably male. Any expression of affection or desire outside that narrow purpose was considered suspect, unseemly. Meanwhile, men sought companionship, education, and pleasure from courtesans and younger protégés, women trained to engage intellectually, musically, and physically. You were not invited to that world. You were expected to be the still vessel, the dutiful silence. Historians still argue how much of this invisibility was universal. In Sparta, women were famously stronger, more vocal, even landowners. But in Athens, the records speak clearly, public life was not yours. And so you retreat inward. You make a small shrine in your quarters to Hera, the goddess of marriage. You keep it tidy, light the lamp with olive oil, and murmur the same prayer each morning, not for passion, but for peace. You braid your hair with saffron threads, not because anyone will see it, but because it gives you a sense of order. There's a strange comfort in ritual, and a quiet power in knowledge. You begin to memorize lines from the epic poems your brothers once read aloud. You write them in charcoal onto broken pottery shards, secret fragments tucked behind the storage amphorae. You find meaning in the stars visible from the courtyard, assigning them names not of gods, but of women you knew, your mother, your cousin, the midwife who spoke kindly to you once in passing. There's a tidbit whispered by older women in the neighborhood that some wives communicate through patterns stitched into their children's clothing. A subtle knot for sorrow, a brighter thread for hope. No one else notices, but the message travels all the same. You believe it. Sometimes you imagine what it might be like to walk freely through the agora, to ask a question out loud and not be scolded, to be seen not as ornament, not as obligation, but as whole. But imagination is both a gift and a punishment. So instead, you master the world that is yours. You learn how to make the best cheese with fewer goats. You grow herbs in cracked pots and trade their sprigs for better wool. You soothe your neighbor's child when he cries louder than his mother's nerves can bear. You create a kind of legacy not carved in marble, but pressed into every small act of daily survival. One day your husband praises your thrift. Another, he forgets to mention you at all. You say nothing. You pour the wine. You bow your head. But that night you whisper a name to the stars, a name that is yours and yours alone. And somewhere deep inside, something resists, because even in this invisible role you are living, you breathe, you feel, you want. You are not a statue, not a silhouette behind gauze. You are flesh and thought and memory. You know this, even if no one else does. And centuries later, someone may find a shard of pottery with a line of poetry scratched faintly across it. They may wonder who wrote it. They may assume it was a man. Let them wonder. Now the light shifts. The curtain at your door flutters slightly, and across time, across ocean and continent, another woman stands in the shadows of her own story, equally unrecorded, equally real. She never made it into textbooks either, but it's time we met her. You are not famous. No palace holds your portrait. No scrolls sing your name. No historian debates your legacy. You lived and then you didn't, and most of the world didn't even blink. But still you were there. Maybe you were a shepherd's wife in the Pyrenees, or a silk dyer's daughter in Hangzhou, or a kitchen servant in a Sassanid courtyard, her fingers raw from the sting of lie. The details differ. The rhythm does not. You were a woman, and your body was never quite your own. The rules came early, carried in lullabies and rituals baked into bread and sewn into seams. You were told to keep your knees together, told to speak softly, told to cover to uncover, to smile to obey, told that silence was grace and that curiosity had a price. And so you learned. You learned that touch was not always tenderness, that love could look like obligation, that pleasure wasn't even part of the conversation, that the act that created life could just as easily steal your health, your standing, your freedom, your name. No matter the dynasty, no matter the empire. In the back alleys of Mughal Delhi, in the narrow homes of Georgian London, in the adobe compounds of the Andes, there was always a version of you, sweeping, nursing, enduring. Not broken, just bent into the shape that was expected. Because that's what history often does. It forgets the quiet. It records the conquerors and omits the confined. But you were always there. You and the millions like you building the world from beneath it. Maybe you were married at 12 and had your first child by 14. Maybe you never married and were judged for it. Maybe you were one of the women in medieval convents who wrote poems in the margins of prayer books. Little fragments of longing never meant for eyes beyond your own, There's a tidbit from the early 14th century, a letter fragment found tucked inside the lining of a forgotten gown in Italy. The ink had faded, but not completely. It read, "I gave him what he asked, and I bore what followed. But in the evening I sang to myself and was free for a while." That's all. Just one sentence. And just one woman. But in that line lives an entire history. And in that history, a kind of quiet rebellion. Historians still argue about whether women's suffering across empires was systemic oppression or cultural norm, whether ancient societies valued women differently or simply exploited them more delicately, whether there were periods of autonomy disguised beneath strict laws. The truth, as always, is layered, a mosaic, part silence, part scream. But you lived. You scrubbed floors while philosophers debated freedom. You tended fields while monarchs discussed succession. You stitched clothes for daughters you knew would inherit your burdens. And still you laughed. You carved joy into small spaces. You found ways to belong to yourself. When intimacy was dangerous, you still dared to feel. When childbirth was deadly, you still hoped. When your voice was ignored, you wrote your name in the margins of someone else's story. Your strength was never in monuments. It was in persistence. And while the world spun forward on the backs of men with crowns and ink-stained fingers, it was the women, nameless, barefoot, resilient, who kept the fire lit. Who knew the stories? Who raised the questions beneath their breath? You were there when the empires fell. You were there when they rose again. You survived them all. And now someone is listening. Tonight, in a world where history is often condensed into headlines and names that repeat your story, is unfolding again softly, slowly, in the hush between modern noise. Not as a cautionary tale, not as a statistic, but as a whisper. I lived. I mattered. And that's the quiet miracle of it. You weren't a queen, a philosopher, a general, or a saint. You weren't written about. You weren't praised. But you kept going. You stitched. You taught. You waited. You endured. And in doing so, you left a mark deeper than any statue etched in the generations that followed. Because every woman who breathes easier today owes something to you. Your resilience, your silence, your song. So as we bring this story to a close, we won't end with a dramatic flourish or a grand conclusion. We'll end the way you lived, gently, steadfastly, with quiet strength. Let's imagine for just a moment that you are standing outside now. The moon is high, the night is cool. You hear the wind brushing through the trees. The world is turning, and no one is asking anything of you. There is peace in the air, and room to exhale. You're no longer confined, no longer invisible. You are simply you. And that is enough. The candlelight is dimming now. You've walked through centuries tonight, not as a tourist, not as a spectator, but as someone slipping into the skin of women long forgotten. The weight of their lives, the quiet of their longing, the grace of their endurance, it all lingers like warm breath on cold glass. You've seen what was expected of them, the danger wrapped in duty, the silence mistaken for peace. And you've felt it too, haven't you? That slow ache of recognition, that whisper of I know. But you've also seen something else. You've seen strength in softness, power in survival, a quiet resistance threaded through time, not always loud, but always present. You've met the women who lived not for legacy, but for the flicker of light they could offer in the dark. And tonight they've passed that light to you. So breathe deep. You're not in Tudor England anymore. You're not in the Ottoman harem or the Greek gynaeconitis. You're here now, and the night belongs to you. The blankets are warm. The world outside is soft with quiet. And maybe, just maybe, when you close your eyes, you'll hear one of them whisper back, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering." Because you did. And that matters. Sleep well now.